I thought Robert the doll was just a legend, until I saw him in person. Growing up in Florida, I'd heard the stories about Robert the doll more times than I could count. It seemed like everyone in the state knew about him, especially if you lived near Key West. He was one of those local legends that people whispered about in hushed tones, a story that most treated as folklore but with just enough truth to make you wonder. A life-sized doll, dressed in an old sailor suit, who was said to be cursed, a doll that could move on its own, whispered at people, and cause chaos wherever it went. Robert Eugene Otto, the original owner of the doll, was the center of the legend. In 1904, he received the doll as a gift from a servant who worked for the family, though, depending on who you ask, that servant might have been involved in something much darker than housework. Some say she practiced black magic or voodoo, and she gave Robert the doll as a way to curse the Otto family after being mistreated. From the moment young Eugene received the doll, strange things began happening in the Otto household. At first, it was small things. Objects moved from their usual places, strange sounds echoing through the house at night. But soon, the incidents became more alarming. Neighbors claimed to see the doll standing in windows when no one was home. Family members reported hearing eerie giggles coming from Robert's room when Eugene wasn't there. And whenever something bad happened, Eugene, who started going by his middle name to avoid confusion with the doll, would insist that Robert was responsible. For years, the Otto family lived in fear of the doll. They tried locking it away, but Robert always seemed to find his way back. Eventually, Eugene grew up, moved away, and left Robert behind. But the doll's story didn't end there. Robert stayed in the Otto family home, later known as the Artist House, where more strange occurrences continued. Now, over a century later, Robert is housed in a glass case at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, where visitors can see him up close. But the legend says that even now, Robert's powers haven't diminished, and that anyone who disrespects him will face his wrath. That's where my story begins. I've always been fascinated by haunted objects, but I'd never taken them seriously. Sure, I enjoyed a good ghost story or a horror movie, but I never thought there could be any real danger in a cursed doll or haunted house. So when I planned a trip to Key West with some friends, visiting Robert the doll at the Fort East Martello Museum was at the top of my list. We arrived in Key West on a hot summer afternoon, the sun beating down on us as we wandered the colorful streets lined with historic homes and palm trees. It felt like the perfect vacation spot, relaxing, vibrant, and full of life. But as soon as we started talking about visiting Robert, the atmosphere seemed to change. Some of the locals we spoke to warned us not to go, or if we did, to be respectful. "Don't make fun of him," one woman said, her voice low, "and don't take any pictures without asking." Trust me, I laughed it off at first, but there was something in her tone that made me uneasy. Still, I was determined to see Robert for myself. I wanted to experience the legend up close, and I figured that all the warnings were just part of the mystique. We arrived at the museum in the late afternoon. The building itself had a kind of eerie charm, a historic fortress-turned-museum, filled with artifacts from Key West's past. But the real draw, of course, was Robert. I had read about him online, seen the old black-and-white photos of him sitting stiffly in his sailor suit, his glassy eyes staring blankly ahead. But seeing him in person was something else entirely. Robert was housed in a glass case in the corner of one of the museum's rooms. He sat on a small wooden chair, dressed in the same sailor suit that had been his for over a century. His face was worn and cracked, with faded features that gave him a vaguely human appearance, but it was his eyes that unsettled me the most. They were dark, almost black, and seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. As I approached the case, I felt a strange sense of dread wash over me. It wasn't fear. Exactly. More like an intense discomfort. Like I was being watched. I glanced at my friends, but they were busy looking at other exhibits. Seemingly unaffected, I tried to shake off the feeling and leaned in closer to get a better look. That's when I made my first mistake. I'd heard the stories, but in the moment, I wasn't thinking clearly. Without a second thought, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of Robert, the flash lighting up the dark room for a brief second. Immediately, I felt a wave of unease. It was almost as if the air in the room had thickened, pressing in on me from all sides. I quickly slipped my phone back into my pocket, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. My friends joined me at Robert's case, laughing and joking about the doll's creepy appearance. One of them knocked on the glass, as if to get Robert's attention. "Hey, Robert," he said with a grin. "Are you really haunted? Or is this all just a big joke?" I felt a chill run down my spine as soon as the words left his mouth. I didn't believe in curses, but something about the way my friend was taunting Robert didn't sit right with me. I was about to say something when a museum guide appeared behind us. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said quietly. "Robert doesn't like to be disrespected." My friend laughed it off, but the guide wasn't smiling. She pointed to a bulletin board near the entrance to the room, where dozens of letters were pinned up. We walked over to take a look, and I felt my unease deepen as I read the messages. Each letter was from a visitor who had come to the museum and disrespected Robert in some way, by taking photos without permission, mocking him, or even just speaking to him rudely. The letters all had the same theme. The people who had angered Robert had experienced terrible luck afterward. Car accident, job losses, illnesses, relationship breakdowns. Each person begged for Robert's forgiveness, hoping to reverse the bad fortune they believed the doll had caused. The guide told us that it wasn't uncommon for the museum to receive these letters. Some people even returned items they had taken from the museum, claiming they had been cursed ever since they left. It was all starting to feel a little too real. We left the museum a short while later, and I tried to brush off the unsettling feeling that had settled over me. It was just a doll, I told myself. An old, creepy doll with a spooky backstory. But that's all it was, a story. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Robert. As we walked back to our hotel, I kept replaying the moment in the museum when I'd snapped the picture without asking for permission. My friends seemed fine, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. That night, the first signs of trouble began. We had planned to spend the evening out on the town, exploring Key West's vibrant nightlife. But as soon as we stepped outside the hotel, my phone buzzed with an alert. It was from my bank. Someone had tried to access my account from an unfamiliar location, and my card had been temporarily locked as a precaution. I spent the next hour on the phone with customer service, trying to sort out the mess. By the time I finally got it resolved, my mood had soured, and I was in no mood to go out. I told my friends I was going to stay in, feeling embarrassed that I was letting something as silly as a doll get to me. But the weirdness didn't stop there. As I lay in bed that night, I kept hearing strange noises in the room. It sounded like faint footsteps, like someone or something was walking around just out of sight. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the air conditioning kicking on, but then I realized that the air conditioner was off. The room was silent, save for the soft creaking of the floorboards, as if someone was pacing back and forth. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. I was letting the stories about Robert get into my head, and now I was hearing things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone on the floor, even though I was sure I had left it on the nightstand the night before. The screen was cracked, and when I tried to turn it on, it wouldn't respond. I groaned in frustration, wondering how much it was going to cost to get it repaired. By the time we left Key West, I was more than ready to put the whole experience behind me. But Robert the doll wasn't done with me yet. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening in my life. It started small, little inconveniences that I couldn't quite explain. My car wouldn't start one morning, even though the battery was new. My laptop crashed in the middle of an important work project. Losing hours of work, I started having trouble sleeping, plagued by unsettling dreams of dark, empty rooms and distant laughter. At first, I chalked it up to bad luck. Everyone goes through rough patches, right? But as the weeks went on, the incidents became harder to ignore. Things in my apartment started going missing. My keys, my wallet, small items I used every day. Sometimes they would turn up in strange places, like inside kitchen cabinets or tucked under my bed, places I knew I hadn't left them. One night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. and watched as the door slowly swung inward. But there was no one there. The hallway outside was empty, and when I checked the locks, everything was secure. That was when I remembered the stories about Robert. I had been trying to forget about the doll, hoping that if I ignored the strange occurrences, they would eventually stop. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that everything that was happening, my bad luck, the strange noises, the missing items, was connected to Robert. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the pictures I had taken in Key West. Sure enough, there was the photo I had taken of Robert in the museum. I hadn't asked for permission. I hadn't followed the rules. And now, I was paying the price. By this point, I was desperate. I didn't want to believe that a doll could be responsible for everything that was happening. But the evidence was too strong to ignore. I had read enough about Robert to know what I had to do. I wrote a letter. Sitting at my kitchen table, I composed a heartfelt apology to Robert the doll. I explained that I hadn't meant to disrespect him by taking the photo without permission, and that I was sorry for any offense I had caused. I asked for his forgiveness and promised that if the strange occurrences stopped, I would never speak ill of him again. I mailed the letter to the museum, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Part of me felt foolish for believing that a simple letter could reverse a curse, but I was willing to try anything at this point. For the next few days, I held my breath, waiting to see if the curse would lift, and slowly, things started to improve. The strange noises stopped, and I began sleeping through the night again. My car started without issue, and my missing items stopped disappearing. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted from my life. But even though the bad luck seemed to have passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Robert was still watching me. Every time I thought about him, I felt that same uneasy sensation, like I was being observed from afar. It's been several months since I wrote that letter, and while the strange occurrences have mostly stopped, I still think about Robert the doll. I've done more research into his history since then, and the more I learn, the more I'm convinced that his power is real. Over the years, countless people have come into contact with Robert and experienced the same bad luck that I did. Some have had it far worse: accidents, illnesses, and ruined relationships, all attributed to the doll's curse. And while some people dismiss the stories as superstition, there are too many accounts to ignore. If there's one thing I've learned from my experience, it's that you should never underestimate the power of a haunted object. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's something about Robert the doll that demands respect. If you ever visit him in Key West, remember the rules. Don't mock him. Don't touch him without permission. And whatever you do, don't take a picture without asking first. Because if you do, you might just find yourself on the receiving end of Robert's curse. Even though my life has mostly returned to normal, I can't help but feel like Robert's influence still lingers. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a fleeting movement, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. I've talked to others who have visited Robert, and many of them share similar stories. Some say they've had dreams about the doll after seeing him in person. Dark, unsettling dreams where Robert is standing at the foot of their bed, watching them with those empty, glassy eyes. Others claim they've heard his voice, a soft, childlike whisper that sends chills down their spine. I haven't had any more direct encounters with Robert, but I still feel his presence. It's as if he's left a mark on me, a reminder that he's never truly gone. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about that moment in the museum when I took his picture without asking, and I wonder if I'll ever be completely free of his influence. But for now, I'm just grateful that the worst seems to be over. I've learned my lesson, and I'll never make the mistake of underestimating Robert the doll again.